Subscribe to The Honest Critique for current affairs, movie, book, and product reviews. Also, make sure you press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
So hello and welcome to another episode of the Security Intelligence and Terrorism series. Today we have among us Air Vice Marshal Manmohan Bahadur, who retired from the Indian Air Force after 36 years of distinguished service. He was an experimental test pilot from the French Test Pilot School, a graduate of the Air Command and Staff College from USA, and a postgraduate in Defense and Strategic Studies from Madras University. He has commanded the frontline helicopter unit and two flying bases, was the contingent commander of the first Indian Air Force United Nations Mission in Sudan, and has been head of training at Defense Services Staff College, Wellington. Currently, he is serving as the Additional Director General at the Center for Air Power Studies in New Delhi. So thank you so much, sir, for taking your time, and thank you for your service. So let's start talking about how air power is an important tool for nation building, and we could talk about some of the major operations, both military and humanitarian, over the last few years. We have also seen an increase in the number of humanitarian and disaster relief and non-combat evacuation of the Indian Air Force. So if you can tell us a little bit about that.
First of all, just remember one thing, that the air power of a nation is not just the air force of the nation. Air power of a nation is all the air assets together, military as well as civilian. So when we're saying air power of India, it is the Indian Air Force predominantly, that's correct, plus the air elements of the other two services and the huge civilian assets that we have got. They constitute a major element of air power of India. So when you're talking of air power in nation building, the point is, let's start from post-independence. And when we talk nation building, the military and the civilians, first let me talk civilian, the military part. I consider nation building on the military side as guarding the borders, plus, and more importantly, actually, ensuring that the boundaries that are there on the map of India are sacrosanct. It started right in the beginning in 1947, when the Dakotas airlifted elements of one Sikhalai to Srinagar, actually saved the Srinagar Valley. Immediately after that, the landing at Leh by Baba Meher Singh in Dakota once again, taking Indian Army there and ensuring that the Ladakh Valley and areas beyond stayed with us. So that ensured that the map that we see now, to the extent that we see it now, was accomplished by Indian Air Power, taking in the army, taking in the ground troops to make sure that the raiders, the Pakistani raiders that came in, do not succeed in their nefarious designs. One doesn't talk of the Northeast. The Northeast border, just remember, when we're talking of the 40s, 50s, and actually even till the 70s, the road infrastructure was very, very bad. And the link with the Northeast was through Indian air power, our droppings done by transport aircraft, by helicopters. So while we were dropping one war, where a new country was brought in. So when we are talking of nation building, let's not forget the nation building and the air power, the effort of air power in the northeast of our country. In the 40s, 50s, and actually right up to the 70s, all the border outlying areas, the road infrastructure was poor, if there was any. And the only link with what I can call, if I call them mainland in what it covers, was through the element of air, through the medium of air. used to do droppings, food supplies, bring out casualties, take medical aid. That was the physical part. But the more important part was the emotional link that happened, that was maintained because of this air effort. That's in the Northeast. Then nation building also involves ensuring that national interests are maintained, they are paramount. So in 1950, way back in 1950, when there was the Ranas revolt in Nepal, the king of Nepal was brought out by the Indian Air Force. And when things settled down, he was flown back to Kathmandu to ensure that the regime out there was not inimical to Indian interests. And then we have got the case of Maldives, of Cactus, where Para Brigade was dropped for similar reasons. And certainly this year we are celebrating the 50th year of the 1971 war. The resounding victory due actions of the three forces, and air power played a vital role. Then we come to all the flood reliefs, the cyclone relief, tsunami relief, and that is a continuation process that unfortunately happens too many times. And lately, the COVID, rescue flights or repatriation flights, where the Indian diaspora was brought out along with foreigners. So this is the element of air power that goes into nation building, the military element and the non-military.
My next question is about the procurement process. If you could tell us about the initial remarks about how the procurement process happens, and then probably move on to the challenges.
The procurement process is governed by our Defense Acquisition Procedure, DAP 2021, which lays down the rules, regulations, and the process to be followed, the steps to be followed. So it's very clearly spelled out by the government. Earlier it was known as the Defense Procurement Procedure, the DPP. Now it's called the Defense Acquisition Procedure. So basically, in a nutshell, because that's a huge subject, you can do a PhD on this actually. So in a nutshell, it is that there is a need that is felt by a service. Let's talk about the Air Force. The Air Force feels the need of, say, getting some radars, for example, a type of a radar. It puts up a proposal to the Government of India. The Government of India, which is the Ministry of Defense, issues something what is called an AON, Acceptance of Necessity. That accepts what you do it in the newspapers. The DAC, the Defense Acquisition Council, has cleared or given AONs for so many 100,000 crores or whatever, that figure that comes out. Remember, that's just the start of the process. It doesn't mean that actually that item will come, because that is just accepting that, yes, the Indian Air Force requires this particular type of equipment. Once that happens, after that, there is the request for proposal that is sent out by the service. The Indian Air Force, in this case, would send out this request for proposal to various radar manufacturing units, which will contain the operational requirements, the maintenance requirements, the logistics requirement, the servicing requirements. So all the procedures of replenishment, all this will be spelled out in the RFP. That is a request for proposal. That is evaluated, then paper evaluation is done. Certain firms who qualify are called for their field evaluation. The field evaluation report is then put up to the government. At the same time, the commercial proposals which came with the request for proposals, which are kept sealed till this moment, are opened up. And then the L1, or the person with the lowest quote, generally is then the procurement happens. So this, in a nutshell, is what is the procedure governed by the Defense Acquisition Procedure 2021.
A lot of experts have commented that our procurement process is mostly based out of a knee-jerk reaction rather than a long-term plan. Based on that, if we see, we have only 30 operational fighter squadrons, and by 2024, 4 of the legacy squadrons will be phased out. Should we be more concerned with the long-term planning?
The allegation that we do, that there's a knee-jerk reaction that happens is true. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And we land up paying much more than if it was a planned process, a thought-out process. because whenever you do emergency purchases, as we did after Kargil, as we did after the problem in the east, Doklam, and the way it happened after this in eastern Ladakh, you always land up paying more. So that's a given. The what should actually happen is that the services, they actually prepare a long-term procurement plan, LTPP, which is integrated by the headquarters integrated defense staff into a integrated plan. Now, that is actually, unfortunately, at present, a wish list. The services want this, but the funds availability is not sure. So what happens is you land up prioritizing what you want in a particular year with respect to what has been allotted by the Ministry of Finance to the Ministry of Defense. But that's a suboptimal way of going about it. Ideally, if the services knew that this is the amount that would come in the next 5, 10, 15 years as a given, then things can be more rationally planned out and procured. The other point is the fact that we still don't have a joint acquisition procedure in the real sense. However, in the last few years, especially after the DMA has come up, the Directorate of Military Affairs has come up, there certainly now is more method in the madness, if I can say that, of trying to get jointness in logistics procurement procedure. One thing. And then there is the issue of that we must, the tag of the largest importer in the world is actually a shameful tag for our country, for India, even 70 years after independence. So we will certainly require imports. There's no doubt about it. It cannot become zero, but certainly not the highest in the world, and where we are importing almost 60% or maybe more of our requirements. So the services require a capability. The capability has to match the process. The acquisition directorate in the Ministry of Defense, they are not experts at what's to be bought. That's the services. So the services want a capability. The bureaucrats, and that includes the military bureaucrats, demand a process. You follow the process and get this capability. The two have to match. And since the military cannot be living in the past, and it requires modern weapons to fight across the border against the adversary, the indigenization is always not possible. Indigenization is a long-term dream, minimum decade, 2 decades till the time you set up. But the modernization is as on today to fight tomorrow's war. So the two are different, are poles apart. So we have to get our indigenization going through procurements, whether internal or from abroad, increase the value of the imports, increase the value of homegrown products while reducing imports and thereby getting an indigenization. Now for that, there has to be a central organization. There has to be continuity in institutional thought. There is a process which is laid down very clearly in the DAP, but institutional memory, institutional thought has to come in. There has to be a little more stability in the posting of personnel who do acquisitions, and not that be seen as something which is very routine. Post out a person every 3 years, 4 years, whatever. So we require specialists for carrying out trials. We require specialists for carrying out evaluations. The Air Force has these too, certainly. And you require specialists for contract drafting, contract modifications, and contract implementation. These are specialist jobs, and that's where our whole acquisition process across board 3 services needs to improve.
So this question might sound a little amateur, but we've seen the mid 2000s. It's considered as the tip of the Indian Air Force and remains active in only three of the operational squadrons. Why don't we extend it to the other squadrons, as it is very crucial part of our operational needs?
So let me give you a very basic example, which actually just to explain the point. I mean, if you had a fleet of SUVs and you want to move around in the streets of Karol Bagh, the guys will not move. You require a small vehicle, a medium-sized vehicle, and a bigger vehicle for maybe long distance. So just to explain it, this is the example I've given. You require a particular spectrum to be covered in war, and all that cannot be done by all top line fighters. You require a span of, shall I say, delivery capability. So for close air support or battlefield airstrikes, you require a certain type of aircraft. There is no point putting in a Sukhoi, such a costly and a big aircraft, which is actually required for long range strikes, long range air interdiction, for carrying out attacks on a tank, for example. The Sukhoi is too costly. You have other elements for that. So the Tejas is there, the MiG-21 and the others which were there earlier, the Jaguars are there. So your question about why can't we get more Mirage 2000, why do we have only 3 squadrons? The Air Force evaluates what's the threat spectrum, how would it go to war when it's thrust upon you, in which way you will do that, and accordingly decides on what type of capability through what platforms. So the Air Force feels that 3 squadrons of Mirage 2000s are sufficient to do the task. There are others, there are the Jaguars, there are the MiG-29s, there is now the Rafale, the Sukhois, about 270 of them. So it's a mix of delivery capability that is required.
We have seen an increase for indigenization or Atmanirbharta with the resurgence of Tejas. If you could tell us about the main advantages and challenges that lies ahead for this rapid push for indigenization.
To be very blunt, you cannot build everything in your own country. That's well nigh impossible. For the simple reason that there are it's sometimes cheaper and more cost effective. Secondly, you may not have technology. Third, you use your alliances, your friendships with other nations to make sure that the amount of money that is available to you, which is not unlimited, so to put it in sectors, in areas of metallurgy, in design, in manufacturing, which can be achieved within your country. Let's take the example of the aero engine. Aero engines are manufactured in the world, I'm saying in the world, by maybe in the Western world, by maybe 5 odd players. The Americans have got actually 2, the GE and the Pratt and Whitney. The French have 1, SNECMA. The Brits have got 1, Rolls-Royce. So the Chinese have 2, 3 of them. So the point at issue is, it's not necessary that the full product be Indian. Certainly, certain products can be, but not all, not possible. That's one. Secondly, I've already spoken about indigenization with respect to the time. Indigenization is a long-term prospect to achieve it. Aero engines, for example, the Chinese, they are going to the moon. They've landed on the other side of the moon, but they still have not been able to make an aero engine, a modern aero engine, to be put on their J-20, to be put on their latest aircraft, okay? The transport aircraft, the Y-20, because there are problems. Jet engine is a different technology. Same thing goes for certain avionics. So while critical components should be made in the country so that you are not held to ransom by somebody else, it may not be always possible. So indigenization is a long-term prospect. Modernization is actually now, because you never know what happens tomorrow. You can't say I'm indigenizing 10 years hence, so well, we'll fight a war 10 years later. So it has to be a nice mix between the two. So as far as the Tejas is concerned, for example, the aero engine is American. The radar at present is Israeli. So gradually over a process of time, we must indigenize products to the extent possible.
So we get to listen a lot of this conversation that whenever an airplane comes, the Hindustan Aeronautics Limited has to upgrade and overhaul. Of course, it can upgrade and overhaul legally. Uh, what is the need for this modification? We've also seen a lot of weight has been given to the Astro missiles. If you could tell us a bit about the missile capabilities and why Astro missiles. So I was going through one of your videos and you're talking about kinetic and non-kinetic combat. With that context, keeping in mind, if you could tell us about the unmanned aerial vehicles. I was going through one of your videos and you were talking about kinetic and non-kinetic combat. With that context, tell us about the unmanned aerial vehicles. How do you classify them, and what are the operational advantages of the enhanced drones in counterinsurgency?
Not so good part is that we have only one aircraft manufacturing and overall agency, which is HAL. We've got to diversify. We've got to get the private sector in. It is so very important to get more lines of manufacture, of overhauling, because HAL's hands are full. Um, and the private sector is as nationalistic as the public sector. We must get the private sector in for all these things. All right. Once we get that going, then what we realize is that you have an option available besides the competition that build up, you have an option available of where to send your aircraft and get them back, aircraft or other ancillaries, radars, and so many other things that need to be serviced here. You cannot set up small acquisitions, a full overall facility here. IL-76, 10, 12 of them, extremely cost prohibitive. But the Sukhois 270, HAL. The Jaguars, HAL. But the numbers are large. And we want these aircraft to be serviced here because we need that capability. So that's where the planners decide when they're acquiring something, whether the servicing and the overall and the upgrade happens here or abroad or in the original country.
We've also seen a lot of weight has been given to the Astro missiles. If you could tell us a bit about the missile capabilities and why Astro missiles.
That's a huge subject by itself. Missile capabilities. You have a threat evaluation, the type of combat that the aircraft would enter into, and hence you decide what air defense, ground-based elements you require, and what are the elements you require to be airborne, slapped onto the aircraft. Now this Astra missile, the Astra, because that's a beyond visual range. All our missiles were earlier imported. The Astra is something which is actually critical. BVR capability is now critical because in modern combat, you may not see your opponent at all. And whoever can see first and shoot first possibly may win. So that's where Astra comes in, so very important. And now we're getting the long range one going. The important part is that it is Indian. As I understand, even the seeker head is Indian. We are very good in rocket technology, but we were earlier importing the seeker head, and that is critical. So I understand that's what the media says. That's got indigenized, and that's our IPR. So that's the good part, and that's how the missiles will progress from here. Vital, because if you have a flying machine but with not adequate and capable armament, it is like a sports car. There's no point just having that.
So I was going through one of your videos and you're talking about kinetic and non-kinetic combat. With that context, keeping in mind, if you could tell us about the unmanned aerial vehicles.
Okay, let's split this question. One is contact and no contact warfare, and the other one is kinetic and non-kinetic strike. Let's talk contact and non-contact. When you're talking of that, non-contact is basically when you don't know what's come and hit you. So that's where the long-range strikes, the UAVs, the UCAVs at a future date, they come in. When you're talking of kinetic and non-kinetic strikes, kinetic strike is plain and simple. You strike something and destroy it. The non-kinetic strike is you disable it in some other form, through electronics, through electromagnetic warfare or whatever. So this is how it is. But when you come talking of using this in counterinsurgency within the country, then it's a totally different ballgame. Just remember, the state is not fighting its own citizen. The state is fighting certain disgruntled elements. The problem is that elements are mixed up with the local populace. So striking them from the air, whether through manned platforms or unmanned platform, is a no-no, plain and simple, because of the collateral damage. You kill or you injure even one innocent person, you've lost the battle of hearts and minds. So that's a correct decision taken by the government of not using air assets in, for example, in the Naxal areas, that is kinetic air assets. But the helicopters are there in a big way for the non-kinetic action of, HADR and for surveillance, for evacuating casualties. We are there in a big way. So that's a political call and a call correctly taken.
So India finally agreed to procure armed drones. One is from the Israel-Iran drone and the other is US MQ-9 Reaper or the Predator B. Why was there an initial refusal in the first place, and what's the urgency right now?
Operational use is evident. You don't put a man in harm's way. You send out these not so costly. They are costly, very costly machines which are unmanned, but carry arms, and you can give the orders and the command sitting with the controller sitting far away. So we've seen this recently in the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. So the armed drones or the armed unmanned aerial vehicles are here to stay. The next step, which is already happening, is swarming because of artificial intelligence and military and machine learning that is going into it. So will it replace the manned aircraft? No, not at all. But that's where the warfare is heading to in terms of manned and unmanned aircraft. Manned and unmanned teaming would happen. And that's how it will be. That's the future of warfare that we are going to see in, literally for hereafter. That is what is going to happen.
Okay, but does this armed drones increase the chance of collateral damage with procurement?
That's a science by itself. Intelligence, surveillance, and thereafter targeting, target selection, and weapon to target matching. If you have to knock off a tank, to exaggerate, you don't drop a 20,000 pound bomb on one tank. So it's a process. It's a scientifically devised, technically devised, step-by-step process of selecting a target. You identify that this is a target to be struck, what weapon will be used, and who will deliver that weapon, whether it will be by a manned aircraft or by an unmanned aircraft. So that's how the process, those are the steps when you plan a mission. That's how it goes. Collateral damage, always possible. There is no doubt about it. But that's where the importance of intelligence comes in. That's when satellite imagery, as well as reconnaissance done by UAVs or your aircraft sweeps, the reconnaissance missions that are. Intelligence is the key word for that.
Yeah. There has been a rapid weaponization of the space. and a lot of operations have been carried out using aerospace power. If you could enlighten our audience a little bit about that.
Two words: militarization of space and weaponization of space. These are two different things. Uh, Militarization of space has already happened, in the sense you're using space to use your military, to meet your military needs. Communication is one. All the UAVs that are being flown by America, sitting by operators sitting in the US and targeting people or whatever in Iraq and Afghanistan. So satellites being used. So that is militarization of space. Weaponization of space is positioning of weapons in space. Now that is banned by the Outer Space Treaty. How long will this last? Has this already been broken or breached by states? There are reports to the effect that some nations have done it. That there have been cases reported in the, and you just Google it, of one country moving its satellite closer to the satellite of another nation, changing the plane, changing the orbit, which is threatening, or where there was no reason. So whether that was a practice or it has been positioned to strike when required. Now, these things have already happened. I think we would be naive to say that in future weaponization of space would not happen, because you cannot you cannot stop technology. And a technologically advanced nation would like to keep that advantage with itself. So I'm afraid weaponization of space would happen in future. Then mankind will have to control it. Otherwise, actually, it can wreak havoc. But that is the reason why the Americans have got a space command, the French have got one, the Brits are doing it, we are setting up a space agency, and the Chinese have got that strategic support force, which controls their assets. So, weaponization of space, if it has not happened already, is going to happen pretty soon, and we need to prepare for it.
So let me end by asking you a very broad question. Uh, how do you see or perceive the future of air power, and why will it be so important?
It's basically a question of who has the advantage on the high ground, has a big advantage. So that high ground earlier was say 2 centuries back was a hillock, a mountain where you could observe troops on the other side. That constituted the high ground. That gave a big advantage to whoever was sitting on top. Same thing incidentally happened in the southern bank of Pangongsu when we climbed up the hills and we were now overlooking the Chinese. But that's rudimentary. Now the high ground then came when the aviation came in. In fact, even before that, balloons came in. So people launched balloons in Europe with observers to observe what was happening across the hill. Basically, the word was across what's happening across the hill. So now with manned aircraft or unmanned aircraft, you occupy the high ground, and of course the highest ground is space. So that's how it is. Whoever occupies the high ground has the big advantage. But just doing that doesn't help. You have to have a system in place which is able to take advantage of the capabilities that the computerization and the way software has developed, the way technology has developed, metallurgy has developed. So it's a big complex thing which needs to be controlled and planned through for the future. We cannot be just doing one thing here and one thing there and tomorrow something else. It has to be a well-judged plan, to be executed well to meet the needs of the future.
So, sir, most of our audience consists of young university students. So, if you have any message for them before you leave.
Aerospace, whether in the cockpit or as a technical officer or in the technology side or in the research and development, that's an exciting field. And our aviation sector is opened up and will open up more. So let's have some young, bright minds opt for aerospace engineering for flying. As you graduate in college and go up, choose aerospace engineering and join all these entities which we are now seeing mushrooming as our as aviation industry takes off. We had a drop because nothing much was happening in that sector. That stage now will change faster. So hope to see some young, bright minds take to aviation and aerospace.
Okay. So thank you so much, sir, for taking your time. It's an absolute honor to host you for the session. And thank you once again for your service. Jai Hind, sir.
No, thank you. It was a pleasure to be with you. And whenever you interact with young people, young mind, actually, you get rejuvenated yourself. So the pleasure is all mine. The honor is all mine.